So I'll try and do a quick update. Obviously, I've spoken about the Syria and so forth, and you pretty much saw what was in the news. It wasn't that much of a. In some ways, Donald Trump in the U.S. kind of limited the strike on Syria, which most of you know happened yesterday or last night, because Russia had said if any of our soldiers which are embedded with the Syrian soldiers are killed, we'll count that as a. They still are counting it as an act of aggression. So it's more or less like a wait and see. The United States, along with Britain and France, did both air raids as well as uh, launch missiles. It was fairly limited, and the targets were the chemical weapons and the production and so forth. So today is sort of like in a lull. If there were no Russian soldiers killed in that raid, which as far as I know none were, that was the threat of Russia. That if any of our men are killed, we'll count that, you know, worse. So it wasn't so much either way that Putin bluffed and backed down. If no Russians were killed, but they still are considering going to the UN and calling it an act of aggression. Whether or not they respond further, at this point we don't know. But the reason I figured I'd do the update is I read in the paper or online that I had a friend of mine, James, who was in one of the Bible studies you recently saw. And he told me the other day, he said, I'm thinking of kind of going out to the island, meaning some of the homeless guys go out to the island. He said, I'm going to walk out there. And to walk over that bridge, there's not a walkway. Some of the guys have done it before, but there's not a footpath. And then as I checked the news, it said somebody was killed walking on the causeway. And the first thing that always comes to my mind when I hear like a shooting or whatever, I always wonder if I knew those people. So I kind of looked for the name. And then when I showed up today at where some of my friends hang out here in Flower Bluff, they said they had bad news. But my friend James was there. But the bad news was, it was one of the girls that was kind of new here. And she was killed here in Flower Bluff, hit by a truck. And it's interesting because she was a newer girl and her husband. And I've seen them and they refer to them as the Missourians. I guess they were from Missouri. But I never spoke to that girl, a little bit to the husband. And because of problems people have sometimes, they're involved in things in the streets. But she seemed to be a nice girl. But I never, because some of the girls are used to men approaching them and all, I usually don't really kind of like interact. Oh, hi, how you doing? The ones I know I do talk to. But for whatever reason, I really never spoke to her, or I wasn't rude to her. But really, the first time I spoke to her, though she was here for a while, I saw her yesterday at 1 in the afternoon, kind of sitting in an area where sometimes people will ask for money from people that drive by. And the area was Waldron Road, right here in Flower Bluff, where the JFK Causeway passes over, where she was killed later that day. And so even though I really haven't spoken to that girl, she was there with the other friends and all, because she was sitting there, I figured, oh, she might feel uncomfortable if I drive by and like see her there. So I kind of said hi to her and she said hi back. That was the only time I ever spoke to her. She was a nice girl, a sweet girl. And she was the one that was killed later, just a few hours later, in the same spot. And so that when the guys told me, we have bad news, John, so and so had died, it hit me. And I could tell that my friend saw, like, oh, it was like it really affected me, in a sense of just affected me. And then I think one of the friends saw, like, oh, it affects him. And I'm sure it affects people. And the husband, I'm guessing he's in shock. I know him, I speak to him, his name is Lee. I believe her name was Crystal, the girl. But that's who it was. So I would just make that note. I believe the Colder Times reported it's maybe the 8th death from, car accidents. So for that sweet girl, even if her name was Crystal, she went. The situation is pretty much the same with the homeless people, and they're trying to deal with some of the problems we have here in Corpus Christi and like in many other places. It was just strange, though, because I never spoke to her, and she's been around for maybe a month or so now with her husband. And that was the only time and I didn't want her to think I was being rude to her. It's just the way things are. I felt this better not, but I gave her that nice hi yesterday, said hi. First time, and she waved back, and then died. So, tomorrow, I might have the teaching post that goes up tomorrow. If not, it'll go up the next day. And we pray for all situations. I tried to watch as much news coverage as I could. And, some of it was still sad, because right in the middle of covering a very important world thing, that the U.S. along with Britain and France did bombing raids, the way they segued back to the stupidity was they said, and of course before this happened, and then they went back to some of the stuff about the Comey book. And it's a sign of the times, in the sense of we're caught up in it. I read a response from one of the Russian officials, and it's interesting because they still contended that, when I heard the other day Russia said Britain did it, the chemical weapon thing, Britain did it. Of course I thought, oh, maybe, obviously Britain wouldn't have done that, meaning a false chemical attack. But the possibilities are that rebels or people that we support and others support, who have done atrocities, by the way, have done bad stuff. And then I read a little more, and they said they were contending that it's the people on the ground that were supported by Britain, certain reporters, that they kind of fell for the possibility of what Russia contends was like a fake thing. And then I read one of the statements, and it said, they went down and said the way the media played this in the last 2 weeks, or the last week and a half, whatever, that they're responsible for manipulating people. That's what they said. What happens next, we don't know. And if it's left the way it is, it's left the way it is. The situation is still pretty bad over there, regardless, because it's a civil war where many, many, many people have died. There were indeed real protests in the streets of Damascus, Syria, by the people of Syria. This wasn't fake. Those that are there, and they're not rebels, and they've been there for many years. You see Assad is their leader. There were legitimate protests against the raids, meaning there's some people that were there for many years, citizens of Syria, who viewed this as wrong. So you have people on different sides, and that's not fabricated, by the way. Other times those things are fabricated. So, 10-minute little update. I'll teach tomorrow, and then you'll see that one coming up. I'll post this right now. We just pray Many of the scriptures I was teaching the last few weeks, but one from Colossians says, He has the dominion. Jesus has this authority and dominion over all kingdoms, all principalities and powers. And He made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. And in all affairs of men, no matter how noble any particular side ever thinks they are, there's always levels of sin, corruption, and even people, good, honest people, allow themselves to be manipulated. I Googled a few things. The United States still has massive amounts of chemical weapons. I don't know how many people know that. The United States still possesses all of these types of things. There were certain treaties we were going to eliminate them at a certain period of time. And there's also a history of times where we used chemical weapons. And it's strange because you would think, well, no, we haven't. Look, I could give you napalm, Vietnam. Well, that was a phosphorus that burned people to death. And look, people don't. This is why I talk on these issues. We all agree they should never be used, okay? But we also agree that nuclear weapons should never be used. And so don't get too manipulated when you see the media. We use them ourselves. The U.S. has used chemical weapons ourselves, and we still possess some. Okay? All right, we'll end with that. God bless everybody.